Frank Miller sat in the common room of Golden Years Retirement Village, his arthritic fingers tightening around his coffee mug. The news on the television showed chaos. Strange ships filled the sky worldwide. It was no movie. It was real. They're actually here, Betty Adams said, her voice steady despite the fear sweeping through the room. The former Navy intelligence officer stood straight, her eyes never leaving the screen. Frank nodded. Never thought I'd see the day. The alien. Ships, sleek and purple-black, fired weapons unlike anything Earth had seen. Military bases worldwide fell first. The news reporters called the aliens Vordax. They moved with purpose, targeting active military installations with precision. Joe Garcia, squinting through his thick glasses, leaned forward. They're taking out our forces systematically, just like we would. But they're ignoring civilian areas, Diane Wright noted, her pilot's eyes catching details others missed. Look at their flight patterns. The 5 veterans watched as the president announced surrender just 48 hours after the first ships appeared. Earth's military forces lay in ruins. The aliens demanded obedience, resources, and territory. Hal Jackson, the oldest at 80 years, slammed his fist on his walker. So that's it? We just give up? The room fell silent as they watched alien troops march through Washington, D.C. The cameras showed something strange. The aliens bypassed elderly humans completely. A young soldier was captured, while an old man beside him was ignored. Did you see that? Betty whispered. They don't consider the elderly a threat. Frank's tactical mind sparked to life. They're making a serious mistake. Later that evening, the 5 veterans gathered in Frank's apartment. The facility administrator had assured residents that the aliens promised not to harm civilians who cooperated, especially the elderly. Their scanners seemed to target people of military age, Betty explained based on news reports. They consider us obsolete. Joe cleaned his old glasses thoughtfully. Their facial recognition must struggle with wrinkles and age spots. My grandkids, phone can't recognize me half the time either. Frank paced the room despite his aching knees. We all spent decades serving. Between us, we have 200 years of military experience. Experience they're completely discounting, Diane added. Hal opened a locked chest from his closet, revealing his preserved service medals. I may be old, but I remember every bit of my training. Frank looked at each of them in turn. Betty, you broke codes the Soviets thought unbreakable. Joe, you were the best sniper in 3 counties. Diane flew experimental aircraft before women were officially allowed in combat roles. And Hal here? Hal smiled grimly. Let's just say Special Forces training never quite leaves you. We're invisible to them. Frank continued, his generals, mind forming a plan. And we're not the only veterans in retirement homes across the country. Betty nodded slowly. I still know the old radio frequencies and Morse code. Bet those aliens don't monitor either. My nephew works at the museum with all those old planes Diane mentioned, the ones with minimal electronics. Joe tapped his cane thoughtfully. I can still shoot. Eyes aren't what they were, but I remember how to adjust. We start small, Frank decided. Gather intelligence, find weaknesses, build a network. Like the resistance in World War II, Betty said. Exactly, Frank replied. They've made a critical mistake ignoring us. We may be old, but we're far from useless. Hal reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone he'd taken from an alien craft that crashed near the golf course. The device glowed with strange symbols. Already got us something to study, he said with a grin. As night fell across the conquered Earth, the 5 elderly veterans began making calls on landlines to other retirement communities. The young might have surrendered, but these old soldiers remembered a time before easy victory, when persistence and cleverness overcame superior force. The Vordax had overlooked the most dangerous humans of all, those with nothing to lose and decades of battle wisdom to share. 1 week after the invasion, Betty Adams sat at her old ham radio in the basement of Golden Years Retirement Village. The administration had forgotten about this room years ago. It was perfect. This is Blue Jay calling Cardinal. Do you read me? Over. Betty used bird names as code words, something she learned 50 years ago in Navy intelligence. The radio crackled. "Cardinal receiving, we hear you, Blue Jay." Betty smiled. Another retirement home had joined their network. She wrote down the name. Sunny Pines, 100 miles north. "Any purple visitors?" Betty asked, meaning aliens. "Minimal. They inspect monthly, ignore us mostly." Betty nodded to herself. "Keep watching. Note their patterns." Blue Jay out. Upstairs, Joe Garcia sat on a bench overlooking the road. His old sniper's journal lay open on his lap. To anyone passing, he looked like an elderly man enjoying sunshine. In reality, he recorded every alien patrol. "Third day they've passed at exactly 2:15 p.m., Joe muttered, writing carefully. Same route, same formation, no variation. Frank appeared beside him, leaning heavily on his cane. "They're creatures of habit. Interesting. Military precision, but no adaptation," Joe said. "When I was in Vietnam, we changed routes daily. These fellas don't." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "They rely on technology, not instinct." In the community garden, Diane Wright tended tomatoes while watching alien aircraft. Zoom overhead. Her trained pilot's eye noticed details others missed. "Their landing gear only extends at the last second," she told Hal later in the dining room, "and they need at least 2 miles for turning. Wider than our jets." Hal pushed his mashed potatoes around his plate. "Good to know." He leaned closer. "I've recruited 6 more from the West Wing, all veterans." Frank's apartment had become their command center. A hand-drawn map covered his dining table. Red pins marked known alien bases. "Betty, what's the latest count?" Frank asked as everyone gathered that evening. 23 retirement communities. In our network now, Betty replied. Plus 6 VFW halls and 4 nursing homes. "What about George at Pine Ridge?" Frank asked. "He says the aliens threw away old rotary phones during their sweep. He collected them from the trash. They're connecting them to the old copper lines." Frank smiled. "The Vordax rely on wireless communication. They don't monitor physical lines." "Found something interesting," Hal said, placing a small device on the table. "Their translator." Joe peered at it. "How'd you get that?" An alien dropped. "They think I'm just a confused old man feeding squirrels." Betty carefully examined the device. "This explains a lot. Their facial recognition struggles with wrinkles. Look at these settings." Diane pointed to strange symbols on the screen. "It's set to identify threats based on physical capability, not experience or knowledge. A critical mistake," Frank said. "What else have we learned?" Joe flipped his notebook open. "They patrol in perfect time intervals, no randomization. Their ships are fast but need wide turning radiuses," Diane added. "And they're extremely hierarchical," Betty said. "Every decision comes from above. The soldiers never improvise." Frank nodded, his general's mind seeing the pattern. "They conquered us quickly because our tech was predictable to them. But old tech confuses them completely," Hal finished. Betty placed an alien communication device next to Hal's translator. "I intercepted a transmission. They're not just invading, they're harvesting Earth's resources." The device played a scratchy alien voice translated roughly. "Extraction begins in 30 days. Human resistance eliminated. Elderly population deemed non-threatening. Continue to ignore." Frank leaned back in his chair, a smile forming. "They've given us exactly what we need. Time and invisibility." He circled a location on the map. "Betty, tell everyone in the network to watch for patterns but take no action yet. Joe, keep monitoring patrol schedules. Diane, find more retired pilots. Hal, we need more veterans." "What are you planning, Frank?" Betty asked. Frank's eyes gleamed with determination. "I'm calling it Operation Gray Fox, and it starts with using their assumption of our weakness as our greatest weapon." Outside, alien ships patrolled the night sky, oblivious to the growing network of elderly veterans plotting beneath them. 2 weeks later, the basement of Golden Year's retirement village had transformed. Donated medical walkers now held gun racks. Oxygen tanks stood ready to be repurposed. Maps covered the walls with growing detail. Hal led 10 elderly veterans through basic exercises adapted for aging bodies. Remember, use leverage, not strength, Hal demonstrated, using his walker to trip an imaginary alien. They expect us to be weak. We are weak, but we're smart. His students, former soldiers and Marines in their 70s and 80s, practiced the moves slowly. My grandson left his hunting rifle when they evacuated, said Earl, a former Army sergeant. Hid it under my bed. Similar stories emerged. Adult children had fled, leaving weapons and supplies with parents and grandparents the aliens ignored. In the craft room upstairs, Betty and 5 former intelligence officers hunched over old radios and computer parts. The aliens use a narrow band frequency, Betty explained. Our old ham radios operate outside their monitoring range. Martha, who had worked in military communications during the Cold War, soldered wires carefully. Like going back to basics, remember when encryption was simple? Simple but effective, Betty replied, writing down codes. We'll use Vietnam-era ciphers. The aliens won't recognize patterns from 50 years ago. Down the hall, Diane met with 3 retired pilots in the library. Bill found 6 crop dusters at his son's farm, Diane told them. No modern electronics, just basic controls. Pete, who had flown helicopters in Korea, nodded. The aliens knock out digital systems. Analog might still work. Exactly. Diane spread out aircraft schematics. We modify them, add water tanks where chemical tanks used to be. Water? Asked Louis, raising a bushy eyebrow. Diane smiled. Joe? Notice something. The aliens avoid rain. Their skin seems sensitive to water. In the garden, Frank and Joe met with Lisa, a 50-year-old nurse who had escaped detection. She was their youngest ally. The hospital lab found something interesting, Lisa whispered, passing Frank a folder. The aliens carry no familiar bacteria. They're too clean. Frank studied the report. So common Earth bacteria might affect them? Lisa nodded. They wear protective suits in hospitals and they've been getting sick. Their skin breaks out in rashes when exposed to our environment. Interesting, Joe said. They seem vulnerable to things we've built immunity to over decades. Frank tucked the report away as an alien patrol passed. The soldiers looked straight, through them, seeing only harmless elderly humans. That evening, Frank unveiled his complete plan to the 5 core members in his apartment. Operation Grey Fox has 3 phases, Frank explained, pointing to his map. First, intelligence gathering, which we've started. Second, resource acquisition. We're making progress there, Hal reported. We have 12 hunting rifles, 6 shotguns, and various handguns across the network. Plus potential vehicles, Diane added. Older models without computer systems. And Phase 3, Betty asked. Coordinated strikes, Frank said. We target their communication centers first, then water treatment facilities. Water treatment? Joe questioned. To collect bacteria, Frank explained. Lisa's report confirms they're vulnerable to our microscopic allies. Betty pointed to her notes. I intercepted more transmissions. The Vordax mothership arrives in 20 days for resource extraction. Then we have 20 days to prepare, Frank said firmly. A knock at the door silenced them. Hal moved to a defensive position while Betty hid their maps. Frank opened the door to find a young man in an alien translator uniform. Mr. Miller, I'm Ryan Collins, the man whispered urgently. I work for them as a translator, but... He glanced nervously down the hall. Some of us want to help. The aliens trust me to handle elderly care facilities. Frank studied him carefully. Decades of military judgment weighing the risk. How do we know we can trust you? Frank asked. Ryan pulled out an alien communication device. Because I can give you this. It's linked to their central command. And because they killed my father when they attacked Fort Collins. Frank exchanged looks with his comrades, then stepped aside. Come in, son. We were just discussing bacteria and crop dusters. Ryan looked confused but entered. The Resistance had just gained its first young ally, and with him, access to alien command communications. The invisible network grew stronger every day, right under the aliens' noses. 1 month after the invasion, Frank stood at the window of his apartment watching alien ships patrol the evening sky. His reflection showed an old man with white hair and tired eyes. The aliens saw the same image and dismissed him as harmless. The communicator on his table buzzed. It was time. All teams in position? Frank asked into the device Ryan had modified. Team Alpha ready, came Betty's voice. She was coordinating, from Sunny Pine's retirement home 50 miles away. Team Bravo ready, reported Hal from his position near the alien communication tower. Team Charlie in place, Joe confirmed from the hills overlooking the alien base. Team Delta standing by, Diane replied from the small airfield where 3 crop dusters waited. Frank took a deep breath. Operation Gray Fox begins now. Across the region, elderly veterans moved with purpose that belied their age. At the alien communication tower, Hal led 5 veterans dressed as confused elderly people on a supposed nature walk. They shuffled toward the fence, taking small steps, some using walkers. Excuse me, Hal called to the alien guards in a trembling voice. Is this the way to the bingo hall? The aliens barely glanced at them, their translators identifying the group as non-threats. The guards waved them away dismissively. Hal pressed a button on his walker. Inside were packed several jars of concentrated bacteria from the water treatment plant. The walker sprayed a fine mist into the air intake vents of the communication tower. Our hearing aids are picking up strange sounds, Hal complained loudly to the guards, while his team placed similar devices around the tower's perimeter. Miles away, Joe situated himself on a hill, an old hunting rifle steadied against a tree. 5 other elderly snipers positioned themselves similarly, each covering different angles. I can't see like I used to, Joe muttered to himself, but I remember how to compensate. He adjusted his aim precisely as an alien commander walked into view. The alien's skin had a distinctive green patch on the shoulder, the mark of leadership. Ryan had told them about. Joe squeezed the trigger gently. The shot was nearly silent with the homemade suppressor. The alien commander dropped. Confusion spread among the aliens below. Their rigid hierarchy meant they couldn't act without orders from above. All snipers, target green shoulders only, Joe whispered into his communicator. At the small airfield, Diane climbed into the cockpit of a vintage crop duster. The plane had been modified to spray water collected from the treatment plant, rich with earth bacteria. Delta team, prepare for takeoff, she instructed the 2 other pilots. Remember, fly low and use the terrain for cover. Their scanners look for modern aircraft, not old planes barely above stall speed. The 3 planes took off, flying just above the treetops toward the alien supply depot. Meanwhile, Betty sat surrounded by radio equipment, coordinating all teams. Ryan had helped connect their communications to the alien network. The aliens are sending a distress call, Betty informed. Frank. They're requesting reinforcements to deal with what they're calling an attack by unknown forces. Frank smiled. They still don't realize it's us. The first real blow came when Diane's crop dusters reached the alien supply depot. Flying low, over the structures they released clouds of water vapor containing bacteria harmless to humans, but devastating to alien biology. Alien soldiers began breaking out in painful rashes. Some collapsed, unable to breathe properly in Earth's atmosphere without their protective equipment. First phase complete, Frank announced as reports came in. Minimal casualties on our side. However, not everything went as planned. One of Diane's pilots, Charlie, radioed with panic in his voice. They've spotted me. They're sending up interceptors. Frank grabbed the communicator. Evasive action, Charlie. Remember your training. They're too fast, Charlie replied. But I'm heading for the lake. If they follow me there, the communication cut off as a bright flash lit up the sky. Frank's hands tightened on the communicator. The first veteran had fallen. All teams, he ordered, voice steady despite his grief. Phase 2 begins now. The aliens know we're here, but they still don't know who we are. Let's keep it that way. As night fell, the resistance prepared for the aliens' response. The element of surprise was gone, but their greatest advantage remained. The enemy still underestimated the elderly. 3 days after their first attack, the aliens changed tactics. They began scanning elderly humans more carefully. 4 resistance members were captured when alien scanners detected metal weapons hidden in walkers and canes. Frank gathered the core team in the basement of Golden Years. The mood was somber. They're adapting, Betty said, looking at reports from their network. But still slowly. Frank nodded. Time for Phase 2. Ryan, what news from inside? Ryan, their young translator ally, looked tired. The aliens are confused. They can't believe. Old humans could attack them. They think young people must be disguising themselves as elderly. Joe laughed softly. If only they knew what old age really looks like. They've called in a special commander, Ryan continued. Someone they call the Hunter. He specializes in finding hidden enemies. Hal frowned. Then we need to move faster. Hit them harder before this Hunter figures us out. Frank studied the map where red pins showed alien strongholds. We've had success with the bacteria. Let's expand on that. He turned to Diane. How many more pilots can you get in the air? 7, she replied. But we lost 2 more crop dusters yesterday. The aliens are shooting down anything that flies now. Then we change approach, Frank decided. No more air attacks. Betty, what's the status on the water supply plan? Betty smiled. Ready. We have people at 12 treatment plants. The bacteria. Cultures are prepared. Frank pointed to the largest alien base on the map. This is their regional headquarters. If we introduce our bacteria into their water filtration system, they'll carry it inside themselves, Hal finished. Ryan checked his alien device. They shower 3 times daily to remove Earth contaminants. It would spread quickly. Frank nodded. Joe, position your snipers around their patrol routes. Don't shoot unless necessary. We want them watching the skies, not the ground. What about the mothership? Betty asked. Our network reports it's arriving in 7 days. Frank's face grew serious. That's our real target. Everything else is preparation. He pulled out a small device Ryan had stolen from the aliens. This is their command key. Ryan says every Vordax mothership has a central control system that responds to it. What's the plan? Hal asked. We need to get this key onto the mothership, Frank explained. Then activate a signal that will disrupt their entire command structure. Diane raised an eyebrow. How do we get on a mothership? Frank smiled. They're bringing us aboard. He pointed to another map showing a collection center. The aliens are gathering Earth specimens to study. Plants, animals, and yes, humans. Elderly humans, Ryan added. They want to understand why Earth people degrade so quickly compared to their species. They're collecting old people as samples? Joe asked, disgusted. Ryan nodded. Volunteer samples. They offer medical treatment in exchange. Perfect cover, Frank said. We volunteer. Get aboard. Use the key. Betty looked concerned. It's risky. Which is why we need backup plans, Frank agreed. Starting with weakening their ground forces before the mothership arrives. The meeting was interrupted by an elderly woman rushing in. Aliens. At the front gate, she warned. Lots of them. Frank moved quickly despite his arthritic knees. Everyone to positions. Ryan, hide. The 5 core members hurried upstairs, assuming practiced poses. Frank and Betty sat playing chess. Hal dozed in a recliner. Joe pretended to read a newspaper. Diane flipped slowly through a magazine. The doors burst open. Aliens in protective suits stormed in, scanning each resident. Their leader approached. Frank, translator device in hand. This facility has unusual communication patterns, explain. Frank looked up with well-practiced confusion. Sorry, Sonny, my hearing aid must be acting up. The alien adjusted its scanner and aimed it at the chess board. The scanner showed nothing unusual. Your facility uses old technology. Why? The alien demanded. Betty smiled sweetly. We're old people, dear. New gadgets confuse us. The alien scanned the room once more before leaving, frustrated. When they were gone, Frank's fake smile dropped. They're getting suspicious. We need to accelerate our plans. The water attack? Hal asked. Frank nodded grimly. Tonight. And prepare for the mothership operation immediately after. The Hunter is coming. We need to strike first. The water attack worked better than anyone expected. 3 days after introducing bacteria into the alien base's filtration system, Ryan reported that over 60% of the aliens were sick. Their protective suits couldn't handle the concentrated bacteria the elderly resistance had cultivated. Frank named their next move Operation Trojan Walker, after the mobility walkers many elderly humans used. "The aliens are desperate now," Frank told the resistance leaders gathered in the basement. "They've requested emergency medical supplies from the mothership." Betty pointed to her communication log. "They're sending down medical pods tomorrow, landing at their main base." "Perfect timing," Frank said. "Now we implement our deception plan." The next morning, 10 elderly humans approached the alien base gates. Frank led them, shuffling slowly with his cane. Each person carried a small basket of home-baked goods. The alien guards raised their weapons. "Hello there," Frank called out in a shaky voice. "We heard your people are sick. We brought medicines." The aliens kept their distance but scanned the group. Their scanners showed only harmless elderly humans carrying plant-based food and medicines. "Our grandchildren taught us how to live with Earth's bacteria," Betty explained kindly. "These herbal remedies might help your people too." The aliens conferred, then allowed the group inside. Their desperation overrode caution. Once inside the base, the elderly volunteers were escorted to the medical wing. Alien soldiers lay on beds, their skin covered in rashes. The air smelled strange. "Put your offerings there," an alien doctor instructed, pointing to a table. Frank nodded, placing his basket down. Hidden underneath cookies were small devices Betty had created. They looked like hearing aid batteries but contained powerful signal disruptors. "We hope you feel better soon," Frank said loudly as they left, a coded message for the others to activate their devices. Outside the base, Joe watched through binoculars as Frank's group exited safely. "Packages delivered," Joe reported into his old military radio. Across the region, other teams moved into position. Hal led a group near the alien landing pad where the medical pods would arrive from the mothership. "Remember," Hal instructed his team of elderly veterans, "we move like we're lost. Confused old folks who wandered too far." When the alien medical ship landed, Hal's team approached from different directions. The aliens were busy unloading supplies and paid little attention to harmless elderly humans. Meanwhile, Ryan accessed the alien communication network using codes he'd stolen. "Frank, I'm in their system," Ryan reported from his hidden position. "Sending false reports now." Ryan uploaded data claiming young human resistance fighters were gathering 60 miles north. The aliens, already struggling with sickness and confusion from the signal disruptors, diverted forces to intercept this non-existent threat. "It's working," Betty confirmed, monitoring alien communications. "They're moving troops away from the mothership landing zone." Frank gathered with Diane and 20 elderly volunteers at Golden Years. Each volunteer wore an emergency medical bracelet containing hidden technology. "The mothership arrives tomorrow," Frank reminded them. "They'll collect their Earth specimens, including elderly humans who volunteer for medical studies." Diane distributed the bracelets. "These look normal, but contain components from alien technology. They'll help us bypass security once aboard." An alarm suddenly blared from Ryan's alien device. His face went pale. "The hunter has landed," Ryan warned. "And he's different. His scanners are more advanced." "Where is he?" Frank asked urgently. "Heading to Sunny Pines retirement home," Ryan replied. "He somehow traced our communication signals there." Frank's expression darkened. "Betty is there." They watched Ryan's monitor as alien forces surrounded Sunny Pines. Betty's voice came through briefly on the emergency channel. "They found our equipment. Destroying everything now. Don't The transmission cut off. Frank stood silent for a long moment. Then he straightened his back, ignoring the pain in his joints. Betty knew the risks. She'll take her secrets to the grave. He turned to the others. "We continue with Operation Trojan Walker. Tomorrow we board the mothership." "For Betty," Hal said quietly. "For all of us," Frank replied. "And for the young ones who can't fight back." He looked at each aged face in the room. Once they had been soldiers. Now they were Earth's last hope. The alien mothership arrived at dawn. It hung in the sky like a giant purple storm cloud. Frank watched it from the window of the transport vehicle, taking him and 19 other elderly volunteers to the collection center. "Everyone remember the plan?" Frank whispered. Heads nodded slowly. Each person wore the special medical bracelet Diane had prepared. Hidden inside was technology Ryan had modified from alien devices. "I still don't like sending civilians," Hal muttered from beside Frank. "We're all soldiers today," said Mary, an 85-year-old former nurse. "My grandson is out there somewhere. This is for him." The transport stopped at a large white tent. Alien medical staff directed the human volunteers into lines. They scanned each person, checking for weapons or technology. Frank stepped forward. When his turn came, the alien waved a scanner over him. "Purpose for volunteering?" the alien asked through its translator. "Arthritis treatment," Frank replied, showing his swollen knuckles. "Your people promised to fix these old joints." The alien marked something on its device. "Proceed to shuttle." One by one, the elderly volunteers passed through security. The aliens found nothing suspicious. The bracelets were designed to appear as simple medical alert devices to their scanners. All 20 subjects cleared, Diane reported through a tiny earpiece hidden deep in Frank's ear canal. Frank boarded the shuttle that would take them to the mothership. His heart beat faster despite his military training. This was the most dangerous mission of his life. The shuttle ride was smooth. Through small windows, Frank watched Earth grow smaller. He thought of Betty and wondered if she was still alive. "Final approach," the alien pilot announced. The mothership loomed larger, its surface covered in strange patterns. As they docked, Frank felt a moment of doubt. Could they really pull this off? Inside the mothership, the human volunteers were led to a large white room. "Medical evaluation will begin shortly," an alien announced. "Remain seated." Frank glanced at the others. It was time. "Now," he whispered. 20 elderly hands pressed their medical bracelets simultaneously. The technology inside sent out a signal that interfered with the mothership's internal scanners. Alarms blared briefly before falling silent. The aliens looked confused as their equipment malfunctioned. "Phase 1 complete," Frank said quietly. "Hal, you're up." Hal pulled a small device from his pocket, the command key Ryan had stolen. While the aliens were distracted by their failing equipment, Hal slipped out the door unnoticed. Meanwhile, on Earth, Joe coordinated the ground attack. His snipers positioned themselves around alien bases, targeting commanders identified by green shoulder patches. "Fire only when the signal comes," Joe instructed. Diane waited in a modified crop duster, hidden under camouflage netting. Her plane was loaded with bacterial water bombs. 12 other pilots waited similarly concealed. "Standing by," she confirmed over the radio. Inside the mothership, Frank led the remaining volunteers in creating a diversion. Several began complaining loudly of health problems, drawing alien medical staff away from their stations. Hal navigated through corridors, following memorized directions from Ryan. He reached a door marked with symbols Ryan had identified as Central Command. 2 alien guards blocked his path. "Lost," Hal said in a confused elderly voice, looking for the bathroom. The guards moved to escort him away. Hal struck suddenly, using moves adapted from his Special Forces training. Despite his age, he moved with practiced precision. Both aliens dropped unconscious. The door required a fingerprint. Hal pressed the hand of an unconscious guard against the panel. It opened. Inside was a vast room filled with alien technology. At its center stood a glowing pillar. "I'm at the central control," Hal reported through his earpiece. "Ready to insert the key." Suddenly a new voice spoke behind him. Impressive for a degraded human. Hal turned to face an alien different from the others, taller, with a distinctive head crest. The Hunter. "You've caused significant problems," the Hunter said. "But your resistance ends now." Hal smiled calmly. "I'm just a confused old man." "You are a warrior," the Hunter replied. "As am I." Hal's hand tightened around the command key in his pocket. He had to get it into the control pillar somehow. The future of Earth depended on it. Then let's see who's better, Hal said, shifting into a fighting stance despite his aching bones. This old soldier still has a few tricks left. Hal faced the hunter in the control room of the alien mothership. Despite his age, Hal's eyes were steady. You fight well for one so old, the hunter said, circling Hal. Experience beats strength, Hal replied, keeping the control pillar in view. He needed to insert the command key. The hunter lunged. Hal sidestepped slowly but with precision. His bones ached, but decades of combat training guided his movements. Your species fascinates me, the hunter said. You grow weaker with age, yet you claim to grow wiser. We don't claim it, Hal answered. We prove it. As they fought, Frank led the other elderly volunteers through the mothership corridors. They created diversions in multiple locations, drawing guards away from the central control room. Sir, we found someone you should see, said an alien guard, entering the control room. The hunter turned momentarily. It was enough. Hal struck quickly, using his full body weight to knock the hunter off balance. In that brief moment, Hal lunged for the control pillar and slammed the command key into place. Key inserted, Hal reported through his earpiece. The ship's lights flickered. The command key began uploading the virus Ryan had programmed. The guard dragged in a prisoner, Betty. She was bruised but very much alive. Betty, Hal exclaimed. Sorry I'm late, she replied with a smile. Got held up at security. The hunter recovered and moved toward the control pillar. Remove that device immediately. Now, Frank, Hal shouted into his communicator. Throughout the mothership, all 20 elderly volunteers pressed their medical bracelets again. The combined signal triggered the command key's final protocol. The ship's communication system activated, broadcasting on all frequencies. Betty's voice echoed throughout the mothership and to every alien device on Earth. Attention all Vordax forces. This is Earth Central Command. We have control of your mothership. Your ground forces are compromised. Bacteria fatal to your biology has been introduced to all your water systems. Surrender immediately. On Earth, Joe gave the signal. His elderly snipers fired simultaneously. Alien commanders fell at bases across the region. Diane and her pilots took to the skies, dropping bacterial water bombs on alien strongholds. Without commanders to direct them, the alien soldiers fell into confusion. Inside the mothership, the hunters stared at the humans in disbelief. Impossible. You are just elders. Weak. Degraded. Hal shook his head. You never understood. Our white hair doesn't mean weakness, it means we survived long enough to learn how to win. The ship's systems flashed with warning lights. The virus had reached the core. What have you done? The hunter demanded. Locked your ship's controls, Betty explained calmly, and transmitted your biological weaknesses to every human resistance cell on Earth. Frank's voice came through the communicator. We've secured the shuttle bay. Time to leave. Hal nodded to Betty. They backed toward the door, keeping the hunter in view. You'll die here, the hunter warned. Maybe, Hal agreed, but Earth will live. As they fled toward the shuttle bay, the mothership began to shake. The virus was shutting down critical systems one by one. Frank waited at the shuttle, helping the elderly volunteers board quickly. Everyone accounted for? He asked as Hal and Betty arrived. The hunter's coming, Hal warned. Frank nodded toward the shuttle's console. Ryan taught me a few tricks. As the hunter appeared in the doorway, Frank activated the shuttle's launch sequence. The doors closed just as the hunter leaped forward. The shuttle broke free from the mothership, accelerating toward Earth. Behind them, the mothership's engines shut down as the virus completed its work. Look, Betty said, pointing out the window. Across the planet, alien ships were rising into the atmosphere, retreating from the unexpected bacterial warfare they couldn't counter. We did it, Hal said quietly. Frank watched his home planet grow larger in the view screen. Not just us. Everyone who believed elderly doesn't mean useless. The shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere as communication channels filled with reports of alien forces surrendering or retreating worldwide. What happens now? Someone asked. Frank smiled, his weathered face reflecting the sunlight breaking through the clouds. Now we rebuild. And maybe the world will remember that old warriors never really retire. We just wait for the battles that matter most. As the shuttle landed, they were greeted by cheering crowds. The elderly veterans emerged slowly, leaning on canes and walkers. They didn't look like heroes from action movies. They looked like what they were, experienced soldiers who had used wisdom where strength alone would have failed.